copy this into our deploy lottery. We'll do from scripts.helpful scripts import get account. Now this is what our get account looked like in our last project. Along with that, we had these forked local environments. We also had from Brownie import accounts and network and config to make this look really nice, right? Let's flesh this out just a little bit more so it's even more robust. Right now, as we know, we have a way to use Brownie's Ganache accounts, and we have a way to use our environment variables. However, there was a third method that we learned that isn't identified here, accounts.load. And this is with our ID. If you still have your account and you still have all your Brownie set up, we do Brownie accounts list, you'll see we have a couple accounts here. We want our get account to be even more liberal so that if we wanted to use one of these as well, we could. So let's modify our get account script here a little bit. Let's first get rid of this else and rid of this indent. What this will do is this will be our default. If nothing that we define prior to this is defined, we'll just default to grab right from our config, which, since we are doing that, let's create our .env. We'll paste our different variables in here, our private key, Web3 Infura, and Etherscan token. And in our Brownie config, of course, we'll do wallets, from key, private key. And now let's flesh this out a little bit. Let's add an index and an ID. Index equals none, and ID equals none. This way, if we pass an index to our getAccount function, we'll just use an index from this accounts variable. If we pass an ID, we'll have trying to do this accounts.load here. So now let's change this up a little bit. We'll say if an index was passed, we'll just return accounts on that index. Otherwise, if we're doing a local blockchain, we'll just return accounts 0. But if there's an ID, we'll return accounts.load ID. Whoops, we need to actually move this up a little bit so that it's before our local blockchain checking. So now in our deploy lottery, we could do something like get account, ID equals free code camp. Whoops, and this is actually free code account, free code camp account. Let's try one more time. It's going to ask for our password here. Now we have a much more liberal get account function. So now that we have account, we can actually deploy our lottery. So we'll say lottery equals lottery.deploy. And this is where we're going to import from Brownie, import our contract lottery. And we're going to have to add in all of these different variables. So if we go back over to our lottery contract, we need to give it a price feed address, a VRF coordinator, a chain link token, a fee, and a key hash. Now, the way we did that in FundMe is that we did it in a way where we checked to see if we were on a local chain or not. If we weren't on a local chain, then we would just pull our addresses directly from our config. If we weren't on a local chain, though, we'd deploy some mocks and use the address of those mocks. We're going to want to do the same thing here, but let's make our lives a little bit easier. We can take this whole process and put it into its own function. So let's make this a little bit easier mentally. The first thing that we're going to need is this price feed address. If we're on a real testnet, of course, we would just go into our Brownie config and add the address, which we will do. We'll add our RinkB network here in a little bit. But for now, don't worry about that. But if we're not on a RinkB chain, what we're going to need to do is deploy our mock. We're going to wrap all of this mocking and checking into a single function called getContract. And we're going to add this function in our helpful scripts. So let's create this function called getContract. So do def getContract. Pass. And let's talk a little bit about what we want this function to do. let's add 1, 2, 3. 3 double quotes here and 3 double quotes here to start what's called a doc string. This will define everything about this contract. So we're just going to say this function will grab the contract addresses from the Brownie config if defined. Otherwise, it will deploy a mock version of that contract and return that mock contract. For the arguments of this chain, we're going to take a contract name. This is going to be a string, and it'll return a contract. Or in particular, it's going to return a brownie.network.contract.project contract, the most recently deployed version of this contract. So for example, if we have a mock v3 aggregator contract, it'll do the most recently deployed version of that with this -1 syntax. Now this get contract function, if this is a little confusing to you, again, we're going to go over this chain link mix in a little bit. And inside of this, it has a more robust description of what's going on in this get contract bit. So you can check that out if you want to learn more. But let's go ahead and actually define this. So we obviously want a contract name as an input parameter. So let's go ahead and add contract name in here. Meaning that this get contract function will get something like FUSD price feed, right? That's going to be the same as what's defined in our Brownie config. And from this name, we're going to get the type of contract that it is. Contract type. And to do that, we're going to have to create some mapping that'll map the contract names to their type. So right above, we're going to do contract to mock. And we're going to create a mapping in here, which will map everything out. So an FUSD price feed is going to be of type mock v3 aggregator. So we're going to have to import mock v3 aggregator from Brownie. So now we're saying anytime you see FUSD price feed, you know that that's going to be a mock v3 aggregator if we need to deploy a mock. So we'll say contract type is going to equal contract to mock of the contract name. Now we need to check, okay, do we actually even need to deploy a mock? So sure, let's check if we're on a local blockchain. So we'll say if network.showActive is in our local blockchain environments. And we'll skip the forked local environments because, again, we don't need to deploy a mock price feed address on a forked local environment. We'll say if network.showActive is in the local blockchain environments. Then we'll check to see if one of these contracts has already been deployed. We'll say if the length of contract type is less than or equal to 0, then we're going to go ahead and deploy mocks. So this is equivalent to doing something like mock v3 aggregator.length. We're checking how many mock v3 aggregators have actually been deployed. If none have been deployed, we're going to go ahead and deploy them. So we're going to have to create this deploy mocks function. So we'll do def deploy mocks. And this is going to be the same as what we did in our Brownie fund me, right? It's going to be the exact same. So we'll say account equals get account. I'm not going to put the prints in here, but you absolutely can. We'll say mock price feed equals mock v3 aggregator deploy. We'll need to give this some decimals and an initial value. So right above, we'll do decimals equals 8, initial value equals 2000, 2000, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8. And in our deploy mocks, we'll say decimals equals decimals, initial value equals initial value. To deploy decimals and initial value, course, this is going to be from account. And for now, that's it. We'll just say print deployed. All right, great. So now we have a way to actually deploy the mock price feed here. So let's go back up to our get contract function. So we have a way to deploy the mock if one already isn't deployed. Now what we're going to want to do is we want to get that contract, right? We're going to want to get that mock. So we'll say contract equals contract type -1, right? So this is going to be equal to doing mock v3 aggregator -1. This is saying, hey, let's grab the most recent deployment of the mock v3 aggregator, which is exactly what we want. Perfect. So this will work perfectly for our development context. However, we're not always going to just want to deploy to a development network. We're also going to want to deploy to testnets. So then we'll say else, and this is where we'll just grab that contract from the Brownie config. For example, ethusd price feed. So we'll say contract address equals config networks network.show active, and that contract name. For example, again, if it's ethusd price feed, it'll be ethusd price feed here. And the way we're setting it up, it's got to be the same as what's in our contract to mock dictionary here. So up here, the way that we did it was we actually got the contract because we had its contract type based off of Brownie. For here, we're going to have to interact with the contract, getting those two pieces that we always need, which are going to be the address. We actually have the ABI from our mock v3 aggregator type right here, and we just got the address. So we can create this new contract type by saying contract equals contract dot from ABI, and this contract package can be imported right from Brownie, and it has this function from ABI that allows us to get a contract from its ABI and its address. So we'll just give it a name. We can say contract type dot underscore name. We can do the contract address, and then the contract type dot ABI. So these mock v3 aggregators and all these contracts have a .ABI attribute that returns the ABI. They also have a .underscore name, which returns their name. So this is perfect. This is how we'll get the contract otherwise. And then at the end of all this, we'll just do return contract. Awesome. So this is an incredibly powerful function for us to get a contract based off of if it's already deployed as a mock or it's a real true contract. I know there's kind of a lot here, but definitely check the GitHub repository if you're a little bit confused on what's going on with this function. And let's also just deploy this to make our linter happy. Why not? Yay, VS Code's happy now. But now that we have this function, let's go back to our deploy lottery. Now we can do a comma, get account, and now we have a get account function. So let's go through this again. This lottery.deploy get account is going to get an ethusd price feed. If we don't have a mock deployed, it's going to deploy a mock price feed for us, and we're going to return that mock price feed. However, if we're on a test net, if we're on a real network, we're going to grab its actual address and return a mock contract of it. Our mock contract here has all the same functions of a regular contract, so we can just use it as the same. This way, we don't have to adjust this function for whether or not we're deploying to a test net or to an actual address. The only additional piece we should put in here, just for clarity, is we should add .address here, because this is going to return the actual contract, and we really only want the address. This is going to make our coding a lot more robust for moving between development environments and testnet environments and working with scripts in a really effective manner. So now that we have this incredibly powerful function, let's go back to the lottery and figure out what are the different pieces we need in here. Okay, great. We also need a VRF coordinator. So to do this, we're going to go back to our docs.chain.link. We'll go to contract addresses, and we could do mainnet here, but let's also just set this up to work with rinkb. So we'll do Control F for rinkb. VRF coordinator is going to be this address right here. So we'll copy it. We'll go back, and we're going to have to do in our config is we're going to have to add a new network here for rinkb. We'll do VRF coordinator